It's a real pleasure to be invited to such an interesting event, and it is also very heartening to see an industry such as the horticultural industry grabbing the sustainability issues by the scruff of the neck, because there are probably very few industries that are so intrinsically connected with the environment, with biodiversity and so forth as horticulture. So ultimately, if you guys can't grab this particular issue and look to do something about it, then we have got a few problems as a planet. But it's great that we have these discussions coming along today, and I look forward to sharing a few ideas with you. Okay, so I thought we'd start with sort of a kind of quote that wakes everybody up first thing in the morning. This is a quote from someone called Sally Nex, writing in the Royal Horticultural Society magazine The Garden, and was published just a few weeks ago. And Sally says, "We reach for plastic unthinkingly, as post-war gardeners once reached for nicotine and DDT." So this is the kind of scale of issue that many people are beginning to think that plastic is. It's something that's in the same kind of scale of problem as issues, to do with agrochemicals that were once used, as Sally puts it, unthinkingly, and obviously smoking. I'm sure we've got a few smokers in the room, but many of us now know that the problems it causes. But think how long it took for the public information and the legislation to work in order for these kind of changes to occur in societal behaviour in terms of legislation and so forth. But I think also the quote gives us a bit of a sense of hope, in the sense that these are issues that were raised, the science came along, showed some of the facts, and then public behaviour, legislation and so forth has changed so that better decisions can be made for health and the environment. Now, plastic has been bubbling under for many years as a major issue, but as we know, really exploded as a prime-time front-page news item, a real priority within sustainability debates in the last couple of years, thanks largely, of course, to the disturbing imagery which was featured in David Attenborough's Planet 2 TV series. Now, the discussions and debates in today's conference will hopefully shed some light on what all this means for those involved in the horticultural sector. Now, my aim this morning is to provide some context to discussions about plastic, because I think it's very important that we always take all these issues and not just look at them in isolation, but think, well, how do they fit into the broader, bigger context? What are the sustainability issues within which plastic needs to be considered? Because then you can think about the most holistic solutions that are going to produce meaningful change, and it's meaningful change that actually shifts the scientific boundaries that is what is required with these particular issues. So the key issues within my presentation will be as follows. First of all, plastic cannot be looked at in isolation. The challenges are part of the broader sustainability field. Understanding the sustainability impacts of plastic helps us to guide us to find appropriate solutions. Secondly, it's complicated. There are so many types of plastic, as I'm sure we all know, not just in business lives, but in our personal lives, and particularly if you're a UK citizen, trying to cope with the recycling facilities that were offered by our local councils can leave you quite baffled, particularly if you move from one area to another and suddenly things that you could recycle in your previous home you now can't recycle, or you've got to put in a different bin. You are standing there shuffling pieces of plastic. It's a complicated business. And that is a reality, but one maybe that also needs to be challenged. Legislation and infrastructure for managing plastic are complex and maybe often unsuited to some of the changes that are needed. But there are real opportunities. The pendulum is swinging towards sweeping changes within the whole field of plastics. And so this is why these kind of discussions are really important for bringing those things forward. So let's just go back in time a little bit and just ask ourselves, so why did people start talking about environment? Why did people start talking about this word sustainability? So if we go back just over 50 years, environmental awareness moved into the mainstream at the back end of the 1960s and the early 1970s. Seminal events at that time included the moon landing, where for the first time ever, our planet was put into its broader context, and people realised that we live on a finite planet, maybe though within an infinite universe, but that is finite. What you see there is all there is. And not only that, from space you can also see the individual features, oceans and forests and deserts. And as we've seen over those 50 years, you can start running time cycles of photos from space and see how the respective land areas of these features have changed. Often, I'm afraid to say, for the worse. The big desertification debates, for example, of the 1980s, when these different kind of photographic maps were being looked at. And of course, one of the features, just to bring it on message for today, that can be seen from space with a little magnification, is Almeria's Sea of Plastic, southern Spain, an area of greenhouses growing a lot of vegetables and so forth for markets across Europe. Okay, and that's a reminder of why we're here today. Okay, so back to the movement and how it evolved. A couple of seminal texts came out in the late 60s, early 70s. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was titled To Evoke the Loss of Species, and then the Club of Rome's book, The Limits to Growth, which was running computer models. Imagine what computers were like in those days, very interesting algorithms and so forth, very complex, a lot of writing things out by hand. But the idea was to show that the world had finite resources, and the rate that human beings were using them was just not compatible with the resources that were available. And lots of doomsday scenarios were brought up in this particular text, which I think it's now sold to like 16 million copies or something, so it shows its impact continues to be major. So a powerful movement began to coalesce, promoting the importance of the natural environment within which we live and drawing attention to the negative impacts of the human pursuit of economic growth. Now, this word sustainability, it's quite a funny word. Well, many of us now accept it as a normal part of the daily lexicon. And yet, if you go back 35 years or so, it just wasn't used in this context whatsoever. And I've done some work in South Africa where we've needed to talk about sustainable harvesting of wildflowers. And it's been required of us to translate the guidelines into different languages. And one of the immediate discoveries we had was there was just no word for sustainability. The concept doesn't even exist within many cultures. And we had this guy who's an African guy, speaks a language called Izzy Koisa, and he had to do the translating. And just to translate the word sustainability took about 2 sentences to make it make sense. Now, it does make sense ultimately, but it's just a very different mindset. So we have to think about the language that we use as well and exactly what it means. But where did sustainability, why did it ping to prominence? Well, it was very much out of the Brundtland Report, which was published in 1987, which talked about our collective future and the need to actually think about, how future generations were going to exist on the planet. And this is where the definition that we all accept today of sustainability emerged. Sustainable development being development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And really, when any organisation or individual is thinking about their the sustainability of their actions or developing a business plan or whatever, ultimately, that's kind of like the key message that should run through it. What are we doing now, and will that have a negative effect or a positive effect on the future? It's quite a simple definition, but very, very powerful. From there, the concept has evolved, so it's now widely accepted to be about more than just the natural environment, and that's, again, been a very important part of the broader movement. Sustainability isn't just about being a greenie, as it were, but also being someone who just thinks about the whole economy and society. And I think we're all now familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, which focus upon economy, society and government. And we know that these goals have become increasingly integrated into government and corporate policies around the world. Integral to the SDGs is the notion that true sustainability should focus upon the 3 Ps: people, planet and profit, in any order you happen to choose, all right? The whole idea is there's no priority list here, it's the 3. You do not have sustainability unless you've actually got all 3 things in operation. And that's been, one of the key debates. There is no sustainability if just people and profit are in balance, but the environment isn't. True sustainability lies right in the intersection of the 3 circles. And if your work is not achieving that, then you cannot truly call it sustainable. And that, again, is one of the key ideas that's been developed. You can't say, well, we're largely one thing and doing a little bit of another. and we're sustainable. It's actually about how do the three things balance together, which is very, very important. Okay. Now, sustainability is widely integrated into public policies across the world and also business planning and reporting. Taking account of sustainability is pretty much now a given for many businesses, and its application is believed to play an important role in ensuring the profitability, productivity and resilience of a firm. Now, the research, particularly in academia and business schools and so forth, is now getting quite sophisticated in terms of saying, how do sustainable actions actually benefit the business? And this is some of the work I've been involved in, talking to people in businesses about how they're meeting the 3 Ps, how it actually benefits their business in a broader sense. And the notions of resilience and productivity are increasingly coming up, and the relationships between different activities and those positive outcomes for business are also been looked at. Now, much of my research has been in South Africa over the last 20 years, where I've spent time working with the flower sector, the fruit sector and the wine sectors. And last year I was involved in a team producing an online training course for people working in those industries to help people working in the industries understand sustainability as a concept a lot better, and to try and put it into the context of what it means if you're working in fruit, flowers or wine or whatever. And the short video extract I'm about to play is interesting as we've taken it from the course. This is interviews we did with real life business people who are having to do the work every day, and they're talking about how they think about sustainability in the daily operations of their business. Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes now, some people involved in the fruit industry and mainly the flower industry in South Africa, talking about what sustainability means to them. Let's hope it works.
Sustainability is quite a broad term. Building the planet first, so all of the earth and the resources that come from the earth, like the soil and the water, to build a society, so the people that live on the earth and use the resources, and then feeding into an economy. So looking after all 3 of those, people, planet, and then profit, in a way that allows for future generations to carry on.
I started a thing in the business. I said everything should have the triple bottom line. So we looked at people, planet, and a product or profit. And we realized that sustainability fits on all of those things. And it just makes a business stronger.
Profitability is a given, and being active in the other areas underpins and helps provide a foundation for that profitability. So whether it's staff retention or staff well-being or water management, then those contribute towards the profitability.
The sustainability initiative and drive is vital to the responsible marketing of a product as well. And we find that once customers understand that there are these components to the products we sell, they buy into it and they appreciate it.
As a food business, I think we have a role to play in supporting the environment. Starting from understanding the impact in our own operations as well as in our supply chains.
Sustainability is really for us part of our DNA, part of everything what we do. We can't just always just look at the balance sheet or the profit and loss. It's not going to be sustainable. We need to look at people and we need to look at planet. We as farmers, as agriculture, are so much more dependent on so many resources to be sustainable. So we need to look what we do today. We need to look at our topsoil, we need to look at our drainage, quality of our water, our rivers. If we don't do this, it's going to be a very short journey, and a lot of our investment is long term.
The whole sustainability drive is a global expectation. We find from all of our customers overseas and even locally that sustainability has to be part of the core values of your business. We give preferential procurement to suppliers who are on this sustainability journey with us.
Okay, well, I hope you found some points of interest within those comments from these entrepreneurs out in South Africa, all of whom are, incredible business people, which is why we brought them into, this particular project. But I think what's interesting within there is you're getting different dimensions. You've got Bayers talking about the impacts, how you've got to actually manage your resource so that you can produce your flowers. If you're not looking after your soil, you're not looking after your water, particularly in their case where, you're very reliant upon natural resource flows, you've got problems ahead. You've then got Anthony from Intaba is talking about the market and what the market expects of them and so forth. And Anthony does supply into the UK, but they also supply Woolworths, who are a leading top-end retailer in South Africa, who have very high sustainability credentials, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about those in a moment. So that's, the perspective of real people doing the real thing on the ground and having to make a profit in order to survive. So let's go back to sustainability. Why has sustainability as an issue gained such reach and prominence? Well, here we have one of, if you're going to talk about sustainability as an academic, you've got to have a scary graph with things going upwards and some red shading and so forth, just to make things look really, really awful. So here's my contribution to that particular trend. Simply put, though, the extent of challenges the planet and the species on it, where we're at, is basically judged now by most analysts to be a crisis. There are many dimensions to this crisis in terms of soil, in terms of water, in terms of air, and of course the overarching spectre of climate change. Now, climate change, is pretty much accepted by most scientists now that it's a given, that you're actually not just a given as a fact, but it's given that there'll be a 1.5 degree rise in temperature in the very near future. The latest predictive models coming out are showing that the 1.5 point will be reached a lot sooner than had been predicted just a few years earlier. And you're probably looking at 2 degrees. Now, 2 degrees, if you live in the UK or Holland, you probably think, well, fine, make life a little bit warmer. But actually, it's the impact upon the systems that drive the weather that are so problematic. It totally alters the dynamics of weather systems and tends to produce, shifts in where the jet stream occurs, and when the jet streams move, then all kinds of chaos is evoked because different types of weather system will start occurring in other places and in a much more intense form. And every time we get a global natural disaster, there's always a debate, is it caused by climate change or not? Well, it hardly matters whether you can actually prove the link for any given thing. The point is the temperature is going up, and all the science indicates that that is going to create more and more problems. And certainly as horticulturalists, what you're going to be able to grow in different environments will shift. And in South Africa, in the Western Cape, which I'm sure many of you know is a wonderful area for growing fruit, horticultural products, there are real concerns. People in the last couple of decades are seeing major shifts in what you can grow where. Literally you're just having to move further around the mountain or further up the mountain or whatever to grow different crops, which is highly problematic. Okay. So what this has led is to the current era in the planet's history being named the Anthropocene, meaning the time period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment, which is quite an achievement really for one particular species to manage that. But whenever one looks at these kind of graphs, and you look over the long time periods over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, it is quite astonishing to see the changes that have occurred literally in a couple of hundred years. And then the projections as to what's going to happen going forward are even more significant. So we talk about the human touch. Well, there are few things that better capture the human touch than plastics. And plastics are very much part of the sustainability crisis. We just all accept plastics are part of our everyday life, okay? But what are they exactly? Well, there are a wide range of synthetic or semi-synthetic materials used in a huge and growing range of applications. They can be organic materials like wood, paper, or coal. The raw materials used to produce plastics are natural products such as cellulose, coal, natural gas, salt, and of course crude oil. And then, the chemical engineers get involved and produce these amazing substances that are of great practical use. Everywhere you look, you will find plastics these days. We use plastic products to make our lives cleaner, easier, safer, and more enjoyable. We find plastics in the clothes we wear, the houses we live in, and the cars we travel in, the toys our children play with, the televisions we watch, and so forth. Everything contains plastics. They're used right across the economy: packaging, construction, transportation, healthcare, electronics. Roughly 15% of the weight of a modern car is plastic, which is, quite an astonishing thing. The first time you have a little bumper crash a few years ago and you realise actually it's not some bit of steel that's been dented, it's actually a piece of plastic. It's quite a moment to realise that infiltration into everything. And of course, plastic's, low cost, it's versatile, it's durable, it's got great strength to weight ratio, many, many positive qualities. But again, we have another scary graph, and on this occasion, this is showing plastic production over the last, since 1964. Plastic production globally has gone up 20-fold, 20-fold, to over 300 million tonnes, and is expected to double by 2035 and quadruple by 2050. Those are incredible statistics to think about. Those are the trends we're all working within. So, plastics and sustainability. Well, first of all, the good news. There are good things about plastics, obviously. That's why they're so integrated. They're lighter than alternative options, so have a lower carbon footprint. So, that's very much a positive. They also have barrier properties, which is why they're used in food packaging and so forth. And of course, those barrier properties help to reduce food waste, which again is another sustainability positive. So it's not all negative in terms of plastics and the sustainability issues. There are definite positives as well to a considerable extent. But then we get into the problems, and this is really about how humans use and create systems around plastics. 95% of plastic packaging material value is lost after its first use. Only 14% of plastic packaging globally is collected for recycling, 14%, with additional losses in sorting and reprocessing, meaning that only 5% of the final value is maintained for future use. And one of the problems with recycling, we often are told recycling is a solution to many things, but often things that usually are recycled into lower value applications and often are only recycled once. So it's really just slowing the problem, it's not preventing it. 72% of plastic packaging is not recovered at all, which again is a very significant issue. 40% landfilled, another 32% leaks out, as they say, in other ways. So what are the types of impact that we get from plastics? Again, this is all part of understand the problem, because when you understand the problem, you can work out what solutions you actually need. And the problem has varying dimensions. To me, the most significant is the contribution to climate change. The plastic industry uses about 6% of the world's oil production, which is equivalent to the oil production of the global aviation sector. And it is predicted that the plastic sector could account for 20% of total consumption of oil by 2050. So that contribution to greenhouse gases, to climate change, which is the biggest threat of all, is very, very significant. And greenhouse gas emissions result from production and after-use incineration as well. In 2012, emissions from production and after-use pathways amounted to 390 million tonnes of CO2. And it's predicted that the plastic sector will account for 15% of the global carbon budget by 2050, which is obviously very significant. Environmental health, yes, go back to Blue Planet 2 and so forth. The degradation of natural systems as a result of the leakage of plastic, especially the ocean. And again, the statistics, the ratio of fish in the ocean by weight currently is 1 to 5 plastics to fish, but that's predicted to even up to 1 to 1 by 2050. I'm not even sure whether they're taking into account the amount of plastic the fish have ingested in that as well, because that would alter that equation to something even worse. At least 8 million tonnes of plastic leak into the oceans each year. So that's a very significant impact. And that's not just an environmental impact, something for the green people to worry about. It has economic costs. The costs of clear up the impacts on fishing industries and so forth. We can see there that the cost of tourism, fishing and shipping in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation region is worked out at being about $1.3 billion a year. So it's very significant impacts. Health. There's still a lot of research to be done on exactly what impacts plastic has upon all our health. But but this comes from what they call I love this phrase, substances of concern, it says in the literature, which are within plastics. These are the additives which can contain impurities and contaminants. And it's known that when plastic is burnt, these are released. But as I say, still much more research needs to be done on those particular outcomes, but it's definitely there as a problem. So, attitudinal shift, the blue planet effect. There's been a marked shift in attitudes to plastic since the broadcasting of Sir David Attenborough's series. Plastic was propelled from the pack of issues we were all as citizens supposed to be concerned about, and it was put right to the forefront. Images of whales and turtles and birds and fish battling with plastic in their daily lives brought home the horror of human beings' lack of environmental stewardship. It was so bad that even the UK politicians promised action, which these days you can probably realise takes something, although we also know they're very good at saying they're going to do one thing and never doing it. But Michael Gove was running around the day after seeing a whale dying horribly on the programme and said action would occur. So we'll have to make him follow up on that if he does become our leader. And consumers have become more, something glitchy. So consumers have become more critical of plastic usage. And how does this translate into their actions? The good old consumer, us. Now, consumers, much of the data here that I'm going to be quoting is either UK or European, done from market research company work. But certainly plastic and packaging issues have really risen up the agenda of concern for consumers. So amongst one survey done by Mintel indicated that nearly 3/4 of European grocery shoppers believe that retailers use too much plastic in their packaging. 64% think retailers should do more to educate consumers. 66% agree it's appealing to shop with a grocery retailer which was pledged to cut down on plastic usage. So the consumers are starting to get with it to some degree. And in a UK poll, 55% said they would choose to shop at a supermarket which does not overpackage products. And we're definitely starting to see these trends in terms of how the retailers are responding to these particular opportunities. But the problem with us, we're all consumers, is we're very fickle, I'm afraid to say. And all the marketing people do their research. There are different categories of consumers, so you'll always get your consumer activists, the small percentage who will never do, in their view, the wrong thing, and other people who will try and do the right thing, and then probably the rest of us. But we tend to follow trends rather than create them, and ultimately convenience and price tend to be the key for changing people's habits. Okay. So what about the retailers? Are they leading the way? Well, most retailers, and I say most, not all, most UK at least retailers have policies on plastic. Okay, Tesco, for example, says it's going to reduce packaging, make it recyclable or compostable by 2025, all of it. Sainsbury's are going to reduce their own brand packaging by 50% by 2020. In South Africa, as I mentioned earlier, Woolworths, they have a suite of policies because of the particular consumer market they're driving at. They want all packaging to be either reusable or recyclable in 3 years' time, and to phase out single-use plastic bags by next year. And just to bring the horticultural theme in, here's a bunch of proteas sold by Woolworths, which I picked up a couple of years ago. Notice no packaging on it at all, no cellophane. The label is a nice piece of recycled cardboard, which is attached with string, not with plastic, and it's all part of their, let's make all this very sustainable and environmental. And if you look at the marketing, it's linked to the sale of the indigenous, product as well, the local indigenous product. So, they're playing very much a marketing game there. But there's a very definite effort with that particular product line to be showing what can be done. But as I'm sure some of you know, with proteas, they're a little bit hardier than most flowers, so you can sort of get away without necessarily protecting them with packaging wrap in the way that maybe you can't with some others. But it's an interesting step forward, an interesting initiative to do that. And it was nice for once to buy some flowers and not then have to work out what on earth you do with this wrap you just no longer need and, nothing to do with it, as it were. Looking through retailer policies in the UK, what struck me very much is how different they all are. They all pick out different things they're going to focus on. Are they going to go for biodegradable? Is it only going to be own brand stuff they focus on? They all have different time frames. Some focus on plastic bags, some don't. So there's lots of interesting things there, but it's also worrying. Really, there should be joined up approach to this stuff would be much more sensible, so that ideas and innovation can be shared. Now, plastics in horticulture, a business for you guys. Yeah, I mean, obviously, plastic's integral to everything that you do, all the way from production through to consumption. Best known examples being the use of plastic sheeting for greenhouses, the infamous sea of plastic, Almeria again. And it's got a little example for you here which shows the double thinking of retailers, okay? This is a farm in South Africa. I took this picture 12 months ago. And this is, I think he's a plum producer. And those poles are going in the ground because the retailer have instructed the producer to put plastic sheeting over the orchards they're planting to avoid sun marks on the fruit. Now, according to the producer, this will have no impact whatsoever on quality. It's purely a visual appearance issue. So the retailer, this particular retailer has very high standards, they claim, in all their literature around sustainability, are forcing something to be done which costs the producer money, which I'm sure is something you would all appreciate is not the greatest thing, for no improvement in price, for no improvement in quality apart from appearance, and with a massive sustainability footprint as well, because that whole area now will be covered in plastic 4 meters off the ground or whatever. So, double think with retailers and, of course, consumers, because why are consumers bothered about the odd small brown mark that shows the sun has actually got near your product? Other issues, well, yeah, we're going to hear more about this. The black plastic conundrum. Pots and trays are obviously integral to everything that your industry does, but the black pots and trays in particular, as you know, are very problematic because of the problems in terms of recycling them and so forth. But look at the numbers again. In the UK, 300 to 400 million plastic pots go to landfill or incineration every year. And only 9 out of 75 UK councils offer proper recycling facilities. So again, as a consumer, you stand there just baffled as to what exactly you're supposed to do. But of course, there are innovators, and there are some in the room today, pushing out solutions, non-black plastic pots, biodegradable trays and packaging and so forth. So for every problem, there's somebody looking for the business opportunity to create the solution. But the challenge is, again, we get back to this thing, it's complicated. What can be recycled? Can it be recycled efficiently? Can it be recycled in your area? It's quite easy to get disheartened around some of these issues. And innovations do not, I'm afraid to say, always solve the biggest problems of all. For example, some degradable plastics, which sound great, you can say we're selling degradable plastics, but you've then got to dispose of them, properly. Which is fine if you've got the facilities to do that. But those degradable plastics can also create greater emissions and take a longer time to break down. So they have other sustainability issues attached to them, which maybe weren't thought about or realised at the point of design. Depends very much on the products concerned. Consumers like the idea of degradable pots. But consumers don't like it when those pots break easily. And I had exactly that experience the other week buying some bedding plants in a UK supermarket. Very thin plastic trays. Obviously, they're trying to reduce the amount of plastic used. And as I walked out of the store, the plastic snapped and scattering peat, or hopefully not peat, maybe compost, and flowers all over the entrance to Asda in Rugby. And it also led to some very inappropriate language for the family walking behind me, but never mind. But these things do affect you as a consumer. It doesn't make your life easy, and I'm afraid we've all got very pampered and we expect everything to work easily for us. Now let's have a little look at some of the bigger drivers towards alternatives. As I'm sure many of you know, a big organisation doing a lot of work in this sphere is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who are driving the new plastics economy, which is demonstrated on this screen. And there's some absolutely brilliant work being done in collaboration with many organisations, businesses, governments and so forth to really push what they call the new plastics economy. Where the key features include creating an effective after-use plastic economy, drastically reducing the leakage of plastic into natural systems, and crucially as well, decoupling plastic from fossil feedbacks, using renewably sourced feedstocks. Thus, you have your reuse, recycle, and renewable. This time, the 3 Rs. All right, so we're moving through the alphabet. We've had 3 Ps, now we're on to the 3 Rs. But these are absolutely essential. Now, the virgin feedstock thing is critical. What this basically means is use less oil, all right, in the process. Because the threat is huge. Even if global recycling rates rise by 50% in the next 30 years, the amount of virgin feedstock required will still double. Okay, so that's the amount of oil that will be needed. And our dear friends, the petrochemical companies, of course, are looking at their future business plans. They realise that oil-based products as fuels are under threat for varying reasons, and are really investing in plastics for the future going forward. So there's going to be a big push from them in terms of plastic products in order to keep their multi-billion-dollar industries going. Now, options for decoupling include developing renewable sources, such as converting greenhouse gases. I don't know how the engineers do this, but they do. Converting CO2 and methane into plastics. Now, one of my colleagues is involved in the biomass to plastics work. There's work going on in this country, Holland and the East China Sea region, to experiment with seaweed as an alternative source for plastic manufacture. And products are reaching the marketplace, such as biodegradable cups, which pass the shelf life gap test, another concept to learn for today, which is the time difference between the life expectancy of the product, i.e. when we'll use it, and the life of the container that product came in. So with some things, it may be a matter of hours or days that the product is in the container, but the container itself may take several hundred years to degrade. So what we're trying to do is reduce that shelf life gap. And a lot of research is going on. For example, seaweed farming at scale, is a very interesting concept. The after-use economy, it's vital to capture more material value and reduce leakage into natural systems. Only, as we said before, only 5% of the material value of plastics is captured post-use. This is a resource that's wasted. It needs to be used. We need improved recycling, better technologies for doing this, and a lot more cross-supply chain coordination so that people are talking to each other at different points in the supply chain about who needs what, in what form, and what can be done with those particular things. A much greater coordination and standardization, which can go against businesses looking for their own unique selling points, but some problems are too big to worry about doing something that's unique to you. This is about the bigger picture here. Right, well, that bit. Now, research and experimentation is key. I would suggest everybody has a look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website, the New Plastics Economy. You may well find ideas that are relevant to you. Research is going to be crucial, and that research needs to be multidisciplinary. We need our physical scientists who understand all the strange chemical components of plastics and the alternatives. We need engineers to look at how these products can then be developed and put into practice. And we need social scientists and supply chain practitioners to look at the practicalities, what will happen with some of these products when human beings are actually involved in using them. Because obviously what can look great in the lab does not always translate well into the environment things are used in. Just very quickly, this is an example someone talked to me about the other day. Small-scale flower growers, the challenges they produce. I was at a conference 3 weeks ago in Cumbria in the UK, where florists were talking about the challenges they face to be sustainable. And these are some of the issues they brought up. In terms of plastics, you're a small-scale grower, you haven't got a huge turnover, your profit margins are relatively tight. You need to use plastics for sheeting, polytunnels, pots, packaging, wrapping, and so forth. It all plays a crucial role in what you do. But if you want to be more sustainable, what are your options, and how do you know as an individual whether those options are actually making a meaningful contribution to sustainability, or are they just actually a nice marketing ploy, or just a good product but actually doesn't tick all the bigger boxes in terms of the sustainability impact. So, for example, you find recycled pots, which sounds great, but then if once those pots have been used, they can't be recycled again. Well, what happens to them? Those kind of issues come up. So, some of the innovations and responses that have been seen. There we have the biodegradable pots, we have bulbs and seeds in cardboard and recycled packaging, biodegradable eco-wrap, recycled plastic pots. There's lots of ideas, there's lots of options going on out there. And what's really heartening is to see the evidence of innovation and change and response to the market. And what was particularly heartening was listening to people saying, no, this stuff matters. We really do want to make a difference and change practices, and our consumers are interested in this. So, heading towards the summary. Plastics is a sustainability issue. Always think about the 3 Ps, all right? People, planet, and profit. But we have to think of the carbon footprint, the climate change issues as the absolute imperative. This is the biggest problem of all. And what impact does any change in plastics use or production actually make to that particular problem? All right. It's not just a moral or aesthetic problem we're talking about. We're talking about damage to the economy. We're talking about social well-being. Okay. Consumers are broadly on side, but at the end of the day are fickle. We consumers, we want convenience, we want good price, and those kind of things first and foremost. We're often contrary. We will change our patterns of behaviour, but often when we're led to it, which is where the plastic bag thing came in. At the end of the day, we all knew that we shouldn't be using plastic bags, but how many of us took action until the supermarket started charging, and so forth? It takes, we're often grudgingly led by legislation and price. Convenience, practicality, and value often come first. But once people get on the bandwagon, they suddenly become very enthusiastic. So that's something to go for. The status quo isn't acceptable. Things do need to change. There's no doubt about that. So it's all very well saying, these are a load of problems. Well, what are we all doing? What can we all do? Well, at Coventry University, we've got all kinds of research projects going on to understand consumers and their attitudes and responses to sustainability issues and so forth. My colleague Benny is doing a lot of work, or looking to do a lot of work in Indonesia around bioplastics, using seaweed and cassava as options for producing products. A lot of technical innovation going on, and talking with social scientists like me about the real world interface. What will happen when consumers get confronted with a product made from seaweed? Will they adopt it? Will how they use it affect its own sustainability? Those are big issues. And then lots of work as well going on within supply chains and waste management. Because again, these things are really crucial. What is happening within the supply chain with waste? And again, what's happening with corporate policies? Are they being really filled through? And what I can say in terms of our work is obviously, if anybody was interested in knowing more or wants to get involved in projects, then please let me know, because obviously partners who are doing it on the ground are critical to these things. If someone wants to get a research institution involved in any way, we'd be delighted to talk to you and introduce you to the right people at Coventry, or dare I say even another university if they're more suitable. Because the key thing is we do some stuff about it. And what about you guys? As a producer, an industry, as an individual, what can you or what should you be looking to do? Lobbying is crucial. You're an industry, as I say, and as you know, it's connected to nature, to biodiversity and beauty. You've got a strong imperative for actually protecting, these parts of your own business. And lobbying decision makers is critical. Decision makers need lobbying, or else they just don't do very much. Whether this is at the level of your local council, who's dealing with the waste out of your production unit, or whether it's as an individual in terms of your domestic or whatever, or as a body, talking about trying to produce more streamlined facilities generally. Engagement, engage with the debates, which is great that today is happening, and organisations seeking to make change, such as research institutes, think tanks, other lobbying groups. It's important for industries to be at the top table and help to drive change. Don't leave it to others. And as an individual, and as an industry, be as informed as you can about these issues. Plastics is very, very technical, and I don't think anybody could manage to fit all the knowledge that's required into their own head. But it's important to know as much as you can, so that you can understand whether ideas and innovations are actually going to have a positive impact. Trial and innovate. Give things a go. And it doesn't matter sometimes if things don't work. The key thing is that we try to drive things forward, be part of trials, see how consumers respond, feed that information across. Adapt, look at non-plastic alternatives, be prepared to make changes in the way you do things. And crucially, integrate sustainability into your business model. All right, as our South African friends at the, in the video was saying, sustainability is part of what they do, and they all have talked through with me in great detail about how the sustainability things they do improve their business and are actually just core to the way that they operate. It's something they do, not the way they do something, and that's very important. And I would say, ultimately, don't worry, it sounds slightly mad, but don't worry too much about consumers or even legislation. Because if you're doing the right things, those things will take care of themselves, okay? Don't get distracted by small measures with little impact. It's the big stuff that matters, okay? That would be my suggestion as to the way forward. Okay, thank you very much for listening.